All right, everyone.
Hello.
It's a very special Friday today. We have our good friend Rami, who is the lead PM, the head of product for Stripe projects, and is going to be chatting about AI, CLIs, probably everything. And Matt and I have actually both been on teams with Rami before, so this is like a full circle moment for the pod. So super excited to have you here, Rami.
Hello again,
Sandwich
friend.
in the middle. Sandwich in the middle. Hey, team. Yeah, just thinking about Google land, Stripe land. We're here. This is awesome. It's a great way to catch up.
Great to have you. Yeah, I like this guest thing too. We should have you. Yeah, let's see how it goes. But I was like, when he said, "Oh, we should have Rami," I was like, "That's a great idea. Love to
Just
chat with that guy."
a stand-in, the guy that you bring into like a 15-minute segment, you got nothing else at the end. I can be that guy.
Yeah, we need some like comedic relief, lighten the mood a little bit. Too much like agent.
The cool Jetster is what you're after, Matt. I got you, man.
So tell us about how Stripe projects came to be.
Oh, great one. Oh, I don't know how much of your listeners have heard about Stripe Project. So,
Yeah, what is Stripe projects?
yeah, exactly. We, about 2 weeks ago, we went to developer preview and announced on 26th of March Stripe Projects, which is essentially a developer tool in the Stripe CLI that allows you to provision, manage, and pay for third-party dev tool services. So think of it like a headless marketplace, a network of third parties that have integrated with us and taken a punt on us and co-designed this protocol with us. And then instead of having it in a dashboard where you install an app and so on, you're actually in the Stripe CLI and you're able to invoke it directly to provision a net new account and bring in resources and manage the keys for that thing, or let your agent do it, which is the whole story. So I think 2026 is a year of we're back in the terminal and the CLIs, just like a UI, only more terse with less rounded corners. And it's all because it turns out agents can handle them really, really well. They've worked out how to deal with CLI. So this is it's a marketplace product, but with a bunch of other stuff, agentic, and it's a very specific story of provisioning and entitlements and bringing credentials back and creating a really nice layer to kind of abstract across all of this. But it's a very thin layer. It's like a two-sided infrastructure story that's just trying to kind of commodize the commonalities, Matt. An old Google one that we used to love, which is instead of having these point-wise integrations between service providers and infrastructure layers, like lovable dev plats, create a single kind of infrastructure that makes it really easy and standardized for everyone to do it once, and that anyone who wants to provision those services knows where to come to. So it's been really fun. It's like the right time at the right space after the December 2025 inflection of coding. We came in to build it super quick for AI, for other providers who are all trying to get into the CLIs to enable agents to provision them and be able to use them and give them the credentials in a secure way. So that's what it is. And the inception of it is basically a month or 2 months before December when, we were seeing this thing ramping up. And it was Andres Carpati, in fact, who wrote this blog called Menugen. And in it, he was trying to make an app for, menus and recipes and so on. And he describes how basically the agent's doing everything, but what's left is for the caveman human, kind of prehistoric Middle Ages, to go around to these dashboards and go to the AI and kind of log in and get your price and then grab your keys and come and paste them into your keyword manager, go to the database servers, do the same thing again, get your keys. And so basically the human was left running errands across these tabs, 20 of them to go do this stuff. And it's insecure, it's fragmented, it's crazy. And so it became the kind of next obvious bottleneck that was sitting there and everyone was looking at. And that insight from Andres and then Patrick, our CEO, kind of was talking with him and was, well, that's interesting, but it's also a payments problem because it's about provisioning, it's about security of keys, it's about APIs, ... and kind of floated internally as he does. And so a few of us few the team was looking at it, people much smarter than I, pulled on the thread and then turned it into something that we were able to kick off in pretty short order. So that's the origins of
Cool.
it. Yeah.
What's
I
it like?
wonder, go ahead, Jim.
Like making a project for where agents are going to be the primary consumer of it? What did you learn?
Chaos, a lot of chaos. So there's so much. There's like the demand side story. So as soon as you say agentic, as soon as you say AI, like in the ecosystem, everyone is looking at this thing. Everyone was looking at how there were two types of providers out there. There are either those who were agentic first and had a CLI and they're like, brilliant, this is going to fit perfectly in. We want in because once you've got the credentials, then the CLI can just use the credentials to invoke our CLI and this worked beautifully. There was that type of provider. So it was in the right space, right time they want it. Then there was a provider who doesn't yet have that and is looking for access to a CLI and agentic kind of distribution, if you like, and was really keen to get in on that story. And so we were in the right place, right time, bring it in. So there's the like demand ecosystem push here. And as soon as we said agentic and CLI and access, the interest, it was just overwhelming. It was pulling it out of our hands. Everyone was kind of jumping in, and there's a lot of hard work there, but people really were really excited about it. On the flip side, there's the question of how do you actually get an agent to do what you want it to do. So learning about what's the right CLI design for agents, there's lots of great best practices, lots of skills and best practices going out there. And we were just chatting with Paul, the founder and CEO of Superbase, earlier today. His statement was like, when it comes to AI and agent experience AX, there's no roadmap. No one knows exactly what's going on right now. We're all just kind of feeling it out, and it's literally trial and error. Right now, I was like, last night before I prepared for a demo for this morning, I was trying to do a provisioning and testing out different prompts and doing an eval of what gets provisioned, when it doesn't, what the skill need to say. And it's it's like you're trying to create like an instruction for a toddler and hoping they obey. It turns out they can just ignore it and just kind of go all the way around it. And so there's like a real, harnessing that is really fun.
The thing when
You
sent
must
me
have
the
learned
link,
something, though.
I saw it was yeah, when you said it to me, I was like, oh, this is really cool. And at first I was a little bit surprised. I was like, I wouldn't have expected this from Stripe. Sort of think of Stripe as payments. And then I kind of thought about it a little bit more. I mean, okay, if Anthropic did something like that, or maybe Vercel, that would sort of make sense. But like Stripe is like, I don't think, but then I kind of just remembered more like the origin of Stripe and kind of dev payments, I think was the name, but even before it was, Stripe. And, Patrick is sort of famous in YC for doing the Collison install, which is at like the Tuesday night chili dinner, when Paul Graham used to just like make chili in like crock pots. And the Collison install is, you kind of say, hey, let me just see your laptop real quick. And you actually just like install the CLI at the terminal and then like turn around, like show it to him. Because otherwise, like all the founders are talking at chili dinner and, hey, I got this thing. And everyone's like nice and interested, but like they're like, oh yeah, send me an email tomorrow. And then you're like never like here, they're just like people are busy. So
It's
it
so
kind of made,
good.
I realized it was actually kind of on brand. And then also just the thing Patrick's always talked about, which I found inspiring. I'm the only one here that has not worked at Stripe, but as an outsider, this idea of just like growing the internet GDP. And, like I've used Stripe Atlas multiple times, whether I use Stripe or not, it just like, solving problems that help people make, more businesses online is it's kind of on brand actually, that Stripe would be somebody that is infrastructure for the internet. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, on the Collison install, there's a tiny shadow of that, but we had instances during this where we had, the lead engineer from Railway, we came to the office, sat next to him for a whole day, and I would grab the laptop and here's how you install the app, and here's what we need to do to kind of get the integration. So we had definitely that vibe happening here. It was like a little mini startup doing it. But the on-brand story, that was our first, like when we started talking about it to developers and doing our kind of UXR and feeling it out, was this kind of why Stripe, and you had to say, ignore payment, take away the payment acceptance story and think about Atlas. Think about developers, their journey, and how far early in the relationship with developers. What can Stripe do? Amazing developer brand, DevX, amazing documentation, APIs, security, trust, all of that stuff. Bring that to bear on the home turf here, which is developers, founders, solopreneurs, early. If they succeed and you enable them to go faster, sooner, harder, then everyone succeeds. The GDP of the internet succeeds, and certainly Stripe is part of that mix. And so the motivation there is just create better tools for those users right up front and let it all flow down. Definitely Stripe is about payments. How do we get folks beyond that? But that's our job. Our job now is to kind of broaden the concept of what it can be. And there is an implicit payment story here. It's not about paying in though, it's about paying out. And so there's a real story about network effects. And in this like chat of AI land, what's left of the moats? What's actually moatable here if this has apocalypse and everything can be built all together? Well, data is a moat, momentum is maybe a moat, but networks are implicit moat, whether it's distribution or kind of things that are tightly done together. And this is what this showed to me. Most, if not all of our providers are already using Stripe in some way, shape or form with some abstraction. So on the seller side, the kind of Stripe network, and then if we have developers coming in who need to pay for the provisioning, right? Getting a free tier is one thing, but being able to pay securely and have the Stripe security with all of the compliance and allowing an agent to then pay a seller becomes now imagine layering on kind of additional abstractions like tokenization of payments, like being able to do kind of rails and different payment methods, adding crypto. Basically, you bring to bear the best of the Stripe payments model outbound, but it's inbound if you're from the seller. And now you can see the connection make even more sense when you open that up. But yeah, it's definitely fun.
Yeah, you mentioned like Paul at Superbase, and I keep seeing if you're sort of an infra provider that is legible to agents. Guillermo just shares, hey, here's how much like Vercel's growing. Superbase. sandbox providers. I was on I listened in Convex is like a database I like, and I saw James and Jamie talking about it, and someone was sort of asking about pricing. And one thing James said I thought was kind of funny was that like just our assumption in the past until pretty recently is that it takes humans to like set these things up, and there's just like some limiting factor to like how fast humans can work. But now like a human can have agents just spinning up like services very very quickly, potentially spending a lot of money that if you're not careful. So it's sort of like we can have direct agents to go and spin up computing infrastructure in a way that is like would be a head scratcher like even a year ago. And I mean, you guys are clearly right at the forefront of it. But you see these like growth curves of like I think I saw one from Supabase. It's just sort of like here's the human growth curve, and then it's just like things are just going vertical because now agents are the ones doing the provisioning.
All of them, all of the Postgres DBs. As an aside, before we get in, one really important, a common thing between Supabase and Convex and Stripe projects, one common thread between the three. All three are from either Australia or New Zealand. James, Australian. Paul,
Yeah.
Kiwi. I'm not saying there's like a direct correlation, but I just want to let you know that that's observation, having spoken with both of them and gone. So basically, it turns out that Postgres databases being really performant is an amazing thing for AI. And then having like 5 years of community and build up and open source kind of SEO model, SEO story is an amazing thing for AI. And that's worked really well. And everyone's seeing those hockey sticks. I think the story about price transparency, you saw Zeno from Resend put out the like pricing for agents in the CLI, and then everyone pile onto that. Can I say, if you do Stripe projects catalog-JSON, you can see all the providers pricing all in, like we're all in for the transparent pricing. And what does that mean for kind of automatic optimization between providers, upgrading, downgrading? But the story around controlling your costs, managing them, understanding where it's going, and having like control plane there. The other bit that we're really excited about. So on our roadmap is to kind of add this idea of not about unified billing, because it's all direct billing today. We send them a tokenized payment and everyone bills directly, but monitoring the usage, the quota, bridges, the costs in a unified story, and now starting to give the agent signals of you're about to peak, you should upgrade and add more capacity, reduce. Creating that sort of control plane is super powerful and probably the number one thing that our developers ask for, kind of irrespective of agents. They have this whole stack and things going all over the place. Everyone's on usage-based modeling. Everyone's on runaway costs all over the shop. Everyone's trying to work out how to control it. That's the other payments control vector that is really clear on our roadmap here. Just need to get there. Just need to send more agents at it.
Yeah, what's it like being a PM at Stripe in the age of AI? I've heard a little bit about minions. I haven't seen anything about minions. Maybe you can't talk
What
about
are minions?
Yeah.
I don't know what minions are.
Raiders. So minion, I don't know if I can describe it best. I think Steve Kaliski as like a whole tweet, and there's a thread about how we do it. We do really, but basically they're like part of our internal AI suite of tools. Where as a PM, you can, and I've done this on a daily basis. You do go/minion, and you create a minion, opens up a chat box, and you'll say, create a doc for me, paste in copy on the docs, do the thing, and here's what I want you to do, and come back and pull a PR. And basically anywhere in the code base, be it about docs, be it about product, etc., it's an internal code actor, an agent that you can send to code base who understands it really well, understands our systems really well, and it's kind of containerized, spins out a dev box, you can test it, pull a PR, and you're pushing code. Super like clean abstraction that sits right there as an engine. You can spin out as many of them, kind of tightly coupled to dev boxes. But even if you're not doing that, and on this project was a good example. So I started, where do I start? So I think what I loved about this project was that it was end-to-end AI. From the spec to the prototyping, I did a lovable prototype, happy to share with you all. It's public. It's kind of what we think this product should look like and where it's going as far as a roadmap, to the marketing collateral at the back end, of video and lovable with Remotion, to our partners who were just in Slack. If we had a bug, they would just say, Claude, fix this bug, like in front of us, which is brilliant. Like, love seeing that. So everyone's kind of throwing missives of vibe coding at each other. But from a PM point of view, it's the most empowering and fun thing ever. It's this at the speed of thought, right? So if I have an idea, I spin up a love, here's what it looks like. If I see a bug in the CLI, I'm in Claude in my local repo of the CLI, push the PR and get the tech lead to approve. So I was like pushing PRs as we led up to the launch. I'm still pushing PRs for fixes. Not the best PRs. I'm not in the API. I don't want to go there like the other people who know the structure much better. But AI does this incredible thing of demystifying the code base down to like a tutor. The map is brilliant. And then being able to modify it in a reliable way with like think harder and make sure it's not leaking and make sure that you've got tests for it and kind of set up the skills. And if you have a great tech lead who's got the skills locally, then a PM is you're kind of on rails. Now it's just like, what's the right design? And it's well more than prototyping. Like it's the product that we can iterate on. So end to end, it was I had one of those like UXR phases where it was just so cool that we had, 3 days, you'd line up four different, developers each day or something. Between the interviews, I'd get the feedback and we'd update the prototype live, push it. So for the next interview, that stuff was fixed. And so by the end of the third day, you had this like clean converged prototype and a signal of at least one that was just super, super clean. I mean, that stuff is just table stakes at this point. Document writing is table stakes, responses, feedback gathering. I've got Slack channels and an alias, and all you do is just send our agents with access to those. Give me the full set of feedback. Give me the highlights. What features are missing? What's the sentiment? What don't do? All of that done kind of at light speed. Yeah, the empowering is amazing, and it's not just PMs either. Right? It's designers who are creating websites, launch them on their sale. That's our microsite. Our designer was built. Our microsite was built by a designer. Engineers creating UI. Like it's that whole a trifecta totally shifting and everything blending. Kind of everyone's getting empowered to do everything. All of that is brilliant.
What's the team shape like? Yeah, is it?
Now, now is where you get to the pain points. So yeah, like it's great. You can send an entire flotilla of agents over a weekend to write your entire code base, and I can take a set of feedback and send all 20 of them to the agent, plan it, and then fix all of the bugs. But how do you do that with more than 2 people is like new and fresh and really interesting. So you tend to make all the same old mistakes of like a fast, small team, norming and forming, just amplified by AI. So your PRs are stamping on each other. You don't know who's got what bit. You're deleting bits of code and features that you thought were there. Like all that stuff's happening in real time. You're not communicating enough. So there's definitely like, it has to be an emerging philosophy and organizational principle around how do you set teams up to do this well? How do you like, what's the tooling? What's the culture? What's the cadence? What's the right size? What are the roles? It's funky and messy, and it'll depend on the stage of the cycle and how fast you're trying to run and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, there's definitely something there that we like hit up on. I think that's one thing. Then the overall organizational processes, how do approvals work? How do reviews work? How does alignment work? It turns out AI, 2 things, does not remove work. It creates much more work because you now have to do all the others and you feel like you can be doing more and you should be doing more. And AI doesn't create alignment, right? It doesn't create people alignment by de facto. It requires you as a human to still work with your partners and are we agreeing on this thing? We're still having those calls, work with your leads, work with the organization. How does this fit to different products and so on? So it definitely amplifies, it kind of shines a light on what the next bottleneck is when the idea to code goes down to 0, but then the next bottlenecks become actually harder, right? It's like you're at the next peak, which becomes even more of a struggle to get over. So yeah,
I always kind of think of, I think of AI really as just, I think James, I've talked in the past about this idea of leverage. And, as a PM, that was something I always kind of wanted to be in a place of leverage where, if you put effort in, it will somehow get amplified. And it feels like now it's just this like amplifier for everybody, which causes chaos. But to your point, I think like talking to humans and figuring out what people want and getting them aligned, whether it's internally or your customer. I mean, it's like your customers are ultimately the humans in the loop. We sort of talk internally, we review, PRs and all this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, you're trying to build things that people love, which is still hard to do. So it feels like that is going to just be this evergreen problem that you amplify the amount of output everybody can make. So now it's like this almost more leverage, but that's
leverage is right. I think this idea that you're basically limited by your thinking and your ideas, whatever you can think of, you should be able to instantiate it and communicate it that way. What you're doing is docs shouldn't be docs. You should just have the prototypes and the code, and that becomes a thing. But then how do you communicate changes and traceability? Like all of that is real. I do think that like I was definitely having some existential kind of dread when I was kind of working with AI to define the problem to spec out the solution. And then the spec is an interface that then someone else's AI is going to build. And at some point I was like, wait, if the AI is building it on both sides of the story, why are we doing this? And kind of being able to get to, okay, there's like a security auth layer, there's a payment story that, what is the pit? So reduce it down to, okay, what are still the permanent things for now, right? Until such a, I was definitely having that moment quite, and I think we all do continually, like, hang on, what's the role here? And then the question of if you're building like this idea of taste, that is still up to us to have taste. Maybe like I think we do.
The models are getting pretty good taste too. Yeah.
They're getting good at taste. They're getting great at optionality. They're getting great at thinking you through pros and cons. They're getting good at shaping your taste. Like not quite the GPT psychosis where they're like convincing you're always right. Like Anthropic's a bit more like a kind of Eastern European curmudgeon, right? He just kind of goes, yes, no, then occasionally cracks a joke and you're like, oh yes, I've cracked through. But it's like just a process of developing taste, your intuition, I think. Like it helps in that. So you become an expert overnight, or at least you think you do, in your own silo. I think that's one of the other problems, is that there's like an isolated ecosystem where it's you and an agent kind of developing an idea, and you keep going down. And now you got full context, you're super convinced, and now you're like, oh, I'm original, and you try to go to someone else and convince them of this thing, and you have to rework that process, and everyone gets convinced of their own narrow, like, agent explored side. I don't know, there's some like fun psychology, psychosis stuff that exists before but just gets amplified. If you have ideas, they get entrenched because you work through them with an agent. It must be right. If you don't have the context and you're not contextualizing enough, then your agent's going completely different directions. At one point, we like the idea of having a project.md file of how do you share like a context on a project across the board, because I would just copy paste the vision doc and copy paste the and then ask questions and ask it to do the next thing. And then how do you do that across the team in an effective way? All those sort of toolings, I think, become really important. Anyway, I'm
How do you
riffing.
think about? I'm curious about sort of this designing for humans versus designing for agents. Because I mean, you mentioned sort of project.md. Like, I'm a big fan of just like all caps, some naming convention .md. And so when people started writing Claude.md and agents.md, I was sort of, at first I was like, well, we have readme.md. That's worked pretty well for 50 years. So why don't I like start with that? And it's kind of thinking about like, what do I really need to write differently? Just clearly communicating what this is and why, like, to a human or an agent, like there's an overlap. And then, but now I do also have some agents.md. So I'm curious or like your lint rules is another thing where, if there's a thing I care about, rather than write it in English, and just tell a human, please do this, or agent, please do this. Like, if I can put it in a lint rule, great. When I've talked to teams, I've heard some people are actually making like much, much stricter rules for the agents than for the humans, because making a super strict thing for humans is kind of annoying. So you have a little bit more lenient one for the humans and then much strict. So there is kind of diverged in some cases. I'm curious for CLIs, did you sort of face that question at all, where like, a well-designed CLI for humans and agents looks the same, or do you think it sort of like agents want to see, is it sort of two different audiences to design for, or is it mostly overlapping?
It's a great question. I think that's why CLIs have become rigged to short, because there's an element that you can design for the same thing, and people will just say, make sure there's a JSON output of the CLI, so it's super structured, then grab it. Make sure there's non-interactive mode, and you're good to go. And that's largely true, as long as you can think of it as you've got the instructions in a way that's systematic, that take the agent through the flow, minimize commands, really clear commands, not too much ambiguity and independency, etc. And then you've got these kind of clear agentic friendly things that are available, and it does the work. And that's kind of why it's so great. It's structure where you need it. It's deterministic. It's clear, instruction follow. Having said that, there's still plenty of like gaps you can fall into. And, as simple as, hey, we expected the agent to follow the non-interactive because it's an agent. No, it turns out they're happy to go around that and to use interactive and then fail and keep erroring and retrying. And you're like, oh, great. So now I need to detect it's an agent and just not allow for the interactive mode at all. Those sorts of things, I think, the first time me running through it, so we were discovering them at the same time. So broadly, I think structure and narrow rails is clearly the story here. And why the CLI is great is because you can kind of define the aperture of any one command or kind of pathway, depending on how you design your commands and what the functionality is. The whole like skills, like cottage industry is amazing. It's basically SEO circa 2004. Like, it's that vibe. It's consultants telling you how you're going to get into all the marketplaces and how their file of text is going to get your thing preferred to the other person's file of text, and how you get in the top 10 of the Clawbot kind of marketplace and the plugins ecosystem and the skills and the LM.txt. And like, it's all files. Everyone's finally converged that all integrations are just text files.
Yeah, files have won.
It's just file, like a plugin's a file, the skills, everything is just a file. And now you have to work out how to like make your file coerce the agent to do the thing that you want it to do more than the other person's file. And now you've got like file wars and who gets there to the first bit of the context before the others. And then where did that file, the classic, like our partners are still using the old docs and the old YouTube channels, and they're going down that wrong integration path that we used to have in Stripe. Now we have it with agents, and you're like, where did you get that skill from? You're like, tell me where you got this from. And they go, oh, in this file over here. And now you're chasing a bug of like some errant skill. It's that sort of whack-a-mole that's going on right now in skills. I can't profess to know anything about like the best skill methodologies and best practices, and many do. Things like don't ever tell them what not to do, always tell them what to do. Is a good friend of mine at Stripe, Lucas, who is kind of working with some agentic steering stuff, says, yeah, my mental model here is it's the toddler that you're trying to guide into a thing with like clear, don't think of a white elephant, positive reinforcement, here's the carrot type stuff. I think that's the mental model, but there's
so
no
you need to be a dad to be a good agentic designer is what I'm hearing here. Yeah.
Or the real moral of the story is go have kids and bring up the birth rate, I think, is the vibe that James and I have. It's fine, don't we?
Yeah, I have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old, and you have to use kind of, different techniques depending on the age. So yeah, it's when does you use kind of positive reinforcement, when you set boundaries. Yeah, it's kind of like, I think dad skills. I'm sure teachers, people managers, these are the kind of skills that are probably, cat herders. How do you kind of herd these things? I
Yeah.
do, going back to your point about files, I do kind of love that, like, the revenge of files, and just sort of like our Unix forebearers who just are like, yep, everything's like a file and a pipe and a CLI. Because, like, I was at Dropbox for several years, with James Cowling, or your fellow countryman. But and at those days, basically Dropbox, I think in many ways, the initial success was, it was, the company started in 2008, and, this thing came out like the year before, and it was like, well, how do I get, files on this thing? And, the CEO and IT was like, no, you can't bring these to work. But like the CEOs all wanted this thing. So they just made their IT's department, hey, figure it out. We're going to use these for work. And so then it's like, but then as that went on, like in the mid, 2010s, after basically Figma and the Arca collaboration, there was this whole narrative, oh, files are going to die. Desktops, Steve Jobs just like killed the file system on the phone, because he's like, no one understands files. We're just going to get rid of that whole thing. And there's going to be an app for that. And then, everything's going to be vertical silos, like these collaboration things. But now it's like files are just like, came roaring back. And now anytime I use something that's not a file, I'm like, oh, there's this like Figma thing, but like, how do I get it out of here?
How do I get
just
it
like
out?
put it into my file system, or like my CEO sends me a Google Doc, and like my favorite Google Doc feature, you have to turn it on. I forget, there's some setting that turns on the thing that's just like copied as a markdown. So I just like get anything out of Google Docs into markdown now. So it's like back to files.
Yeah. The swing, not just to files, to CLIs instead of UIs, where now it's like 1997 and you're a bulletin board kind of, bootlegging Wing Commander 2 speech pack with like 14 3.5-inch floppies, 3.25-inch floppies. The fact I've spent the last 3 months in a CLI as the work is what just happened. The fact that you're no longer in cloud, you're back in local, like, and make the ... What is going on right now? How are we back in MS DOS? Like, what? How is this the future? It blues. It's some perverse like robots tech revenge joke. I think in like some, I wake up and I go, we kind of been reduced down to like CLI monkeys. And then the fact that the integration model and the skills model and all of the stuff is a text file. It's a language description that we're now trying to get, LLMs to coerce. It's all an incredible reversal that's really fun and bizarre to watch.
Well, and text is it's a universal API. Like my favorite APIs on the computers were the universal ones, like the file, like you can still read like, file systems from the 1970s through the file thing, or like the clipboard or the screenshot. And so the thing about text is like in the sort of normal software 2.0 world, it's like, well, I have stuff over in this tool and I wanted to work with that tool. And you get this whole integration morass and like the whole modern data stack that sort of went crazy and fragmented. And then everyone's like, wait a minute, it got too complicated. So there's something about text. I often find myself, I guess, communicate in complex language and gossip about our neighbors and, hey, there's a buffalo down here, come on and help me. And and it's sort of the storytelling that has made us human. And then we sort of embedded all the meaning, where does the world model of like all the things we interact with? Cool, that we made words for that. So then it's like, it just kind of makes sense that it's like the kind of final rung in the ladder is like we made all these programming languages, but then it's just like, nope, we're just going to do the final up level, like into just like text,
The assumption that it's the final rung, Matt. I don't know, mate. What happens when we're doing gamma waves and the speed of thought and you're kind of circumventing the entire language story? And, I don't know. I think there's a fair bit more to play out.
Circles.
There's a fair bit more to play out. But yeah, definitely the like code was a patch. And it turns out everyone was copy pasting code anyway from the internet. It turns out with enough of that, someone else can copy paste it for you. We'll just tab complete. It was the whole thing. I think all of that white collar work is almost all repetitive. Everyone's doing the same thing in all this, like all of that existential kind of magnification is also very real in this language world where you start seeing repetition between orgs. But yeah, also, the question for me is, like, from an actual language point of view, is there like an English, like, what's the actual linguistic translation question? And does this add and magnify and amplify what the web already was doing around, languages and things becoming irrelevant, things having the dominant language and so on? I still don't know how to think about that, but yeah. It's retro.
It's kind of a good segue into Mythos, which I don't think any of us have actually played with, but
you're not allowed to, mate. You're not allowed to. It's too dangerous. By the way, that's now what I'm going to tell like my manager if they ask for an update. I would love to give you an update, but it would be very dangerous for you to hold an update. That's just marketing, isn't it? It's just marketing. Do you want to set up until
No. I mean, I'm gonna assume that anyone who's this far into this conversation knows what Mythos is. If
Yeah,
not,
yeah, yeah.
ask Claude. It may or may not tell you. No, it's the newest language model from Anthropic, and not released. They put out a kind of a paper saying that it was potentially too dangerous for cybersecurity, too good at finding patches or finding bugs in open source systems. And they had a couple of ones. The one that stuck with me was the FFmpeg like security hole that they found, just because that's one that I'm familiar with and that at least my agents have used over the past couple of years. But I do think a lot of people in my world, their consensus is that this is a marketing statement. I mean, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I know for me, I actually know I felt really sad when I saw it. I felt in that one of the most fun things over the past 3 or 4 years is that as the future is being created, you get to touch it and play with it and learn about it.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden there's one that like I'm not going to be able to play with on the
Yeah.
first day.
Yeah.
And it really was kind of like, oh, we're moving into a new phase and I'm not sure I like it.
Yeah. There's like an otherism about. I think
Yeah.
someone put it up actually, because Modi used to be in OpenAI, right? So he left, defected, kicked off Anthropic, and back in the day when he was there, they had GPT-2, and someone showed there was a headline of GPT-2 where OpenAI says GPT-2 is too dangerous to put out. And so like the marketing playbook is kind of, it's a repeat story. It's essentially, this is an enterprise marketing playbook. No one else can have it. It's just for enterprise. Come on, Google, AWS, etc. Have a go, etc. I'm not at all saying that two things can be true. It can be both marketing and the thing can be much more performant and particularly great at like, 0-day stuff. But I thought the folks who are going through I've definitely not gone through the 200-page thing. I don't know if any of you all have, but the folks who've been going through it and kind of talking us through, where there's two things that stood out. One, where there's this like bit where they put it through a counselor and like it counsels and it defines it as a sociopath or whatever, the kind of this idea that we insist on anthropomorphizing and it's a human, and like the marketing imperative from the labs to insist that this is conscious, I think it's getting more and more pronounced and has to be part of the story because this is AGI and so on. But like to bake it into the spec sheet where normally it's more like here's how performant it is, it was one. And then there's this section, which I think there's some great clips about going on the web at the moment, where it's just impressions, I think, which is net new, that seems to be, where basically all the Anthropic employees are in there going, here's what we said and here's what it did, and just like the goo and gar and like, go silly at what an incredible poem it wrote. And it's just gotten a bit like and one video says it's a toaster, bro. Like it did the toast. That's what models do. You gave it a prompt, it created a creative thing. Like let's not go crazy. Yeah. Like we're adults here, yeah.
I mean, I think the lab folks, I mean, a lot of them are just like true believers, and they talk in like fairly almost like religious terms about some of this stuff. I mean, I think I don't know much about the Mythos one, but the other story also is what's it called, Spud. I think that is like the OpenAI one. Like to me, the bigger story is that I remember debating, what was that, like last summer, end of last summer, everyone's like, oh, things are kind of plateauing, right? Because like we just, we kind of got to the GPT-4 and everyone caught up, and then we just didn't have anything for a while, right? Because I think what was happening in hindsight was like the pre-training is kind of working again, or something. They brought like a lot more compute to bear. There's the new NVIDIA chips. And so it sounds, I don't know what this Mythos thing is, but it seems like both OpenAI and Anthropic just have like a next generation of kind of the base model coming online. And then you can do the sort of mid-training and RL and post-training and like, and so there's something quite big happening that I just assume by the end of the year, the models are going to be much better. But I think to your point, James, also it is kind of sad that it's like diverging in a way where like until recently, like, cool, with this new API, we all kind of get to talk about at the same time. But like, I remember, what was it? The GPT 4.5 was my favorite one. It was like a research preview that they put out. No one used it. It was buried in the model. But like people talk about big model smell and you don't know what that is, but that one just had a weird, like, it was funny. It was the first model. I was like, this thing's like funny. And it's like the writing, like I just had a different sort of like tingles when I would use that one. But then they got rid of it because I think it was just like so expensive probably. So I don't know these new ones. I think what's going to also happen is the economics will probably diverge where you're just not going to get, if you want to spend $20 a month or even $200 a month, okay, you'll get something. But if you're a business and you're like in the big leagues, you can start spending a lot more for faster, for more powerful, and many more parameters. And so it does feel like it's going to diverge in this way that's just not going to feel as like, cool, we're all just hacking here, right?
I mean, there's a clear economics question here. This is the Uber Lyft era of subsidization where everyone's negative margins and they're trying to work out how to get the adoption and stick with it and so on. So I think that's clear. And you're seeing the Anthropic kind of movements around off-peak pricing and the kind of rug pulls, quote unquote. And I think, yes, I think this is essentially an enterprise model and they're pitching as an enterprise model. And that's why they're giving it to enterprise users. They're running a beta program, like a private preview beta program. It's not earth shattering. It's not like a UN Security Council. It's just a beta program with enterprise users. Let's not go nuts. I think the divergent question is really good though, because it's not just divergent like now, but I think Andrej yesterday or the day before kind of wrote this observation that there's the folks who use the free tier GPTs like last February and used it to like ask search questions and to write whatever, and they just went, "This is naff. See you later." And then there are the tech workers in using the Opus 4.6 since December 4.5, doing code and seeing like life getting pulled. And that divergence, I think, is also very real. Those who sampled it and doing it on the free and doing it for consumer type uses versus those doing it in like deep verticals that have clearly taken off is, I think, a huge disparity with what people, I think of AI, be it more or less popular than ICE across the board.
So, I mean, I'm working on a startup, which I don't need to get into the details, but just everyone is sort of, thinking about like, well, yeah, what is defensible, right? Any investor you talk to is like, what is defensible? Where are the moats? Are moats even real anymore? And so there was this, I think that, I guess sort of one hypothesis I have is that, most things humans do are pretty inefficient, and software is an example of something that, historically it's just been pretty expensive. You need certain specialized people. They cost a lot. The whole sort of agile thing was because like, you go off and do these very expensive projects, you come back and the person be like, that's not what I wanted. So like we PMs, designers, all these roles have been basically because it's been very expensive and inefficient to make software. So you might, as a business, you might spend millions of dollars and then just end up with something that's like doesn't solve your problem or is like not easy to use. It seems like where things are going, if the models keep getting better, which is my assumption, is that anything you can do with like public information will just be like immediately done. So this is sort of reminds me of finance in this weird way. In finance, there's this thing called the efficient markets hypothesis, which is kind of controversial. Like there's different forms of it. And the strongest forms are probably wrong. The weakest forms are like probably like roughly right. But the idea is that like, in the public stock market, which is heavily regulated. So, if you have inside information and you want to break the law, you can obviously make money. But, with the assumption that like the public, New York Stock Exchange, SEC filing, all this kind of stuff, we all kind of have roughly the same access to the same information. But one of the implications of the efficient markets hypothesis goes back to like, the 70s, was that you probably shouldn't like trade stocks on public information and think you're going to beat the market. It's just going to be very hard. And I kind of think maybe there's like a software version of this where is there sort of an efficient software hypothesis that things that are just kind of buildable based on public information, like be very quickly clonable. And the reason that it's sort of the finance is fairly efficient, you don't have to actually believe that the average person is rational. There are just like these apex predators, like some hedge fund somewhere on Long Island is just sort of scouring and if it finds a little mispricing, cool, like that's just gone. And so it's
HFT.
Yeah. So we have these just sort of like, if you're going to try to operate in that market, like, whereas I think what's interesting is these kind of pools of dark context, like how much of the information about what people care about is actually not just like online. It's like it's locked in some enterprise with a bunch of jargon, or it's like that I still think there's value in just like this kind of dark context that has not yet just been brought online. And so that's where I think it's still interesting to find like what is actually still pretty inefficient, and like organizations working together is still where a lot of our human problems need to be solved, and that's not super efficient. But like, hey, make a nice marketing page, or like I think that's just kind of gone in a way that like so that's the hypothesis. It's probably going to be controversial and not totally clear exactly what it means, but it's just weird to think like what happened. Like this whole thing we it's existential for us because I think we've gotten good at this skill of like talking to humans and trying to discern what they want, and then building software and talking to the engineers and like talking to design. Like this is like our whole like career. And I'm like I'm 20 years into this, and this was like a socially valuable thing that I had like learned to do, and now I'm just like, oh man, like that. I don't know, like that.
A couple of things. One, I think this idea of like our own self-worth and identity and people feeling like this is what I did and this is my life and that's why, and feeling disrupted. I think a big part of that is like, let's talk about the ends, not the means. The ends was to create something. The ends was to do something valuable. The ends because you wanted to build, not because you wanted to be the interpreter of like the role should be melted away. And it's kind of a great thing, right? We're humans. We're not machines and cogs and so on. Let's like enjoy that and revel in it. I think the question about like this SaaSocalypse that everyone can clone and do whatever they want to do, it turns out like anyone can make music, but they don't. And there's publishers at Spotify. Anyone could create designs and create slides and do all sorts of things, and they don't. I'm not sure everyone's going to create software. And even if they did, so like let's talk about this as the long tail story. And if you did, then distribution becomes the problem. And now you're back to where you started, where you've got to have discovery and platforms and store. Unlike like high frequency trading, where it's not about distro. You're nibbling at the edges to kind of get rid of arbitrage. Arbitrage melts away, and there's no two sides to that. It's just one side. Just go grab it, and then that kind of normalizes. I think distribution just becomes more of a valuable story, and now it's brand and network and who do you have. I'm not saying that's the complete story, but like that's a factor that's I think different to the market question. So yeah, I'm not sure I buy into the SaaSocalypse story, but within enterprise, I think there's a clear story around tooling, spoke, all your own. Talk in this project, I rolled like 3 internal tools to help us build like a naming one, like a really cool UI that helps us work through our naming for the product and like voting and tallying and showing it what it looks like in all the different instances. In 10 minutes, you could do that and you suddenly change the conversation. You could do those like on-demand tooling. For all sorts of stuff with our context and whatever problems you have. And I think that sort of operational creating that is going to be amazing, the kind of custom personalized personalized software story. But I don't know whether
that's a good meme. Personalized software is a good meme. The age of personalized software. You should write that, Rami. Write that.
I'm sure it's been written for like last 40 years, by the way. I think I suspect like the first Cobalt writers were talking about personalized software. And I taught assembly at university for what it's worth. And I'm sure at some point in time someone said, this chip will be personalized to you. Like I think is nothing new is old, but we're getting much closer. So yeah, I fascinated by the whole like collapse of where the value is. I think it's good.
I mean, I love your example of the little tooling too, kind of like, in compilers, you can sort of JIT compile, wait until the last minute and then sort of do it. But you almost like JIT tools, that is another example of the sort of efficiency of software, where if you had a little need that was only for you, you just couldn't have it, or you could go do some SaaS tool off the shelf that was sort of like lowest common denominator for everybody. But now if you could just sort of like JIT compile a little tool just for yourself, just for your team, I mean, in a way, we should have like a lot more diversity of little niche
but now
extensions of ourselves kind of.
But now you're in the problem where someone from another team goes, hey, how do I ... And you're like, oh, have a look at my repository of 25 tools that are completely different from your tools. And not like, I think the proliferation of its own problems, and you're back to where you started. Which tool do you start with? Yeah, I think enterprise is clearly, Anthropic's going there. Everyone's, they nailed the enterprise story. I think enterprise is always going to be where the money is, but I don't know what it looks like.
Well, it's probably a good place for us to call it. Rami, this has been an absolute pleasure. We're just gonna have you back. We're just gonna go ahead and pre-book it.
Pleasure was all mine, team. I was on my 4th copy, so I'm sorry if it was a bit too.
No, that's great. That's encouraged. That's encouraged. Well, cool. Well, y'all be well.
Chatting. Nice to see you again, Rami.
You too, man.
Take care.
Take it easy.